Are you looking for new books to read? Do you like finding a new special author? Are you tired of the same old books from the same old authors? Well then, welcome to Discovered Wordsmiths, a podcast where you can hear from fantastic new authors. Join Stephen Schneider as he finds and talks to authors you may not know, but authors that have worked hard to write great new books. Hear about their book and why you should check it out. So sit back and listen to today's Discovered Wordsmith.
All right. Well, Lily, welcome to Discovered Wordsmith. It's great to have you today. How are you?
Thank you. I'm in glorious Northern California where we're having this 80-degree weather on April.
Well, April Fools. I'm in Ohio, and we had about an inch of snow this morning.
Are you serious? Is that April Fools?
Yeah, it's Mother Nature's April Fool. Yeah, it's snowing again right now, in fact.
Oh, what a contrast.
Yeah, very big difference. So where in California do you live?
Just outside San Francisco.
Okay. I've never been up that far. I used to live down by San Diego.
San Diego. Yeah, that's a ways away.
Yeah. Yeah. For Ohio, it's like the distance of a whole country.
That's right. Yes. In mentality and other ways too, I'm sure.
Yeah, very much so. You're right. All right. Well, before we start talking about your book, tell everybody a little bit about yourself. What are some of the things you like to do besides writing? What's a little bit about your background, where you come from, what you've done, etc.?
Well, I'm originally from Canada. I grew up in Calgary, Alberta. And when I was 23, my adventure took over, and I applied to Bechtel Corporation to sponsor me into the States because I'd worked for them in Canada. And they had their head office in San Francisco, so they sponsored me. And I ended up in San Francisco, totally culture shocked because at that time, you couldn't even, if you went to a cocktail lounge, you had to sit down with your drink. You could not stand up and hold a drink. So coming to San Francisco, to Broadway, to the whole crazy scene here, it took me several months to really acclimate. It was a whole new world. But I was a single mom and raising my son without any help from his father. So I ended up working two jobs. At night, I'd work for Bechtel in the daytime in San Francisco. And then at night, I'd quickly drive over to the Fred Astaire dance studio in Oakland. And no, I didn't give dance lessons, but I was a receptionist and got a whole perspective on what happens in those places. So then I thought, if I could just have one job where I could make enough money to support us, that would be lovely. So I managed to get a job at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco. They had the Crown Room and they had all these wonderful lounges. So I worked there for 5 too long years as a cocktail waitress, and probably wrecked my knees and my whole body probably. Because it's hard work. We couldn't sit down. We had to stand in our stations with this heavy tray in our arm. So it was a tough job, but I was able to make enough money to support us. At some point in my late 20s, I had what they used to call a nervous breakdown, but for me, it was a breakthrough. Because it led me then into therapy, and that's when I discovered, there's a writer in there that's screaming to get out. So that's sort of how I came to writing, and what actually led me to it was during this period of being in depression and therapy and so on. I started journaling, and that's become a lifelong obsession of mine. Is every day I write about what's happening in my life and what I'm thinking and doing and so on.
Nice.
But it was a wonderful way for me to work my way out of that period, and then also was part of discovering the writer in myself. When I was 13, I had kept a diary that I had a secret language that I used in this diary. And I had no idea what the language was, but I, like coded words so that no one would be able to, if anyone read it, they wouldn't be able to understand what was in it. So, there was that impulse there at that point, but then life took over, and it took me many years then to come back to the Lily that was trying to express herself at 13. So then, eventually I was a high school dropout, and eventually I took my general education development test that was in lieu of a high school diploma. So I was able to go to community college here in Marin County, a wonderful community college. And then from there, I went on to San Francisco State and majored in English with an emphasis on creative writing. And then I went on later and got two different master's degrees, one in the humanities, because I thought if I'm wanting to be a writer, I need to have a good liberal arts background. So I did that, and then I took another master's in English, again with an emphasis on creative writing. So I write,
Wow.
yeah, I write in just about all the genres except for plays, and I love all of those modes of writing. But the books I've published have been poetry and novels. So 3 novels, one poetry collection, one chapbook of poetry at the moment.
Nice.
Other novel comes out in October.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, good. So you really kind of planned and wanted to be a writer. It wasn't something you decided to do later or you fell into. You really worked towards that goal.
Well, I did from the time I, went through that depression and everything. Uh,
Right.
then I became more focused. I started out. I certainly didn't start out to write novels or even fiction. I started out poetry was my main focus. But then I thought, well, if I want to sell anything, uh, poetry isn't a big seller. And so I thought, well, I'll try, see if I can write fiction. So I started. I took a few fiction workshops when I was, doing my degrees, and so I learned the basics of writing fiction. And then eventually I thought, well, I'll try writing a novel. Uh, I don't recommend doing that unless you have a lot of stamina and determination, because novels take a really long time to write. So yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So you said you've been journaling for years. Do you get a lot of ideas for your stories from your past journaling?
Well, they may not be overt ideas. I also record my dreams every morning, and they're so rich in imagery and characters and things that I know that those things bleed into my writing, whether it's poetry or fiction. But I don't necessarily, the idea doesn't necessarily start with a dream, but I think that whole combination of my work with the unconscious seeps into the writing that I do, whatever genre it is. But in terms of, like, for example, my the second novel I had published, Curva Pelagrosa, it started with an image from a newspaper article I read where a tornado had struck this small town just outside of Calgary, where I grew up. And there was something about the image of that tornado going into that town and sort of uprooting people and turning things upside down. I couldn't get rid of it. And I thought, there's a story here. And that story led to the novel of Curva Telegrosa. So, another piece of short fiction of mine came from another newspaper article. I read about a snake appearing in a New York apartment house in the toilet, and I thought, hmm, I wonder what this is about. So, so that led to my short story, Priscilla the Python. Uh, so that, the stories start from so many different places.
Right. Okay. So do you think though your journaling has helped you because you said you have a habit of writing every day and you're used to writing? Do you think that habit has helped you produce?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think if I were, I mean, I teach memoir workshops uh, at the Farm Institute in San Francisco. Uh, but if I were teaching, other classes, poetry or short fiction, I would really urge students to get into the habit of keeping a journal, because not only are they, priming their unconscious and keeping that connection going with their unconscious, but they're also developing the practice of writing. I mean, just being able to get down sentences and to get comfortable with your voice and, learning, trying out different things. So uh, I think that journaling is a really excellent foundation for all writers.
Nice. Okay. So your first book, or actually your latest book, what tell us a little bit about it, what it's about.
Yeah, Freefall, a divine comedy. Uh, it it came out of my husband and I took a trip to Vancouver, where I once lived. Actually, it's where my son was born, and I had a friend that I hung out with back in the late 50s, and she had a place in Whistler, BC, and she invited us, to visit there, which we did. And during that visit, we were reminiscing, and this woman who owned the house in Whistler, BC, was part of this group of four young women that I was part of, and we called ourselves the Four Musketeers. Muskrats are Canada's almost its national anthem. The beaver is the national anthem in Canada, but muskrat's close. Anyway, so,
Got it.
so we were full of ourselves, and we moved to Toronto and etc. But then we broke up, and there were some bad feelings between some of us, and some of us never saw each other ever again. So, in that visit to Whistler, I started thinking, well, what if these four women were to get together now? What would that be like? And so that led to then Freefall, a divine comedy, which was published just in 2019, and it's the main character, Tilly Bloom, is a wacky installation artist, and so she's sort of the focal character of the story, and so these women all end up in Whistler, BC, for a reunion of 4 days. While they're there, Tilly discovers that one of her friends actually has a place in Venice. And Tilly also knows that Venice has a biennale, an art biennale, and it's happening that year. And Tilly still hasn't quite made it as an artist. She has to apply for grants, and she does waitressing work and so on to support herself. So she's never quite cracked open that door. But she thinks if she could get to Venice, maybe she could crash the Biennale. So she manages to manipulate things during the reunion in Whistler, BC, so that they all agree to get together for a 3-week extension of their reunion in Venice, where they have that free flat to stay in, and they'll be celebrating their 60th birthdays. So that's how the novel starts, and and so over the course of the novel, there's a new intimacy that happens between these women, and uh, and they have some very strange experiences, especially in Venice, and uh, and it's a there's a lot of humor in the narrative, but it's also a serious look at death, the end game, and that comes in, and Tilly does a lot of thinking about life and etc. So uh, so Freefall. Um, uh, what more to say about it? It's kind of a magical mystery tour through, with these women that there are a lot of surprises and laughs. And I'm exploring aging, I'm exploring art in it, I'm exploring feminism, I'm exploring motherhood, and life itself. So yeah,
Nice. And did you self-publish this, or is it published
no,
traditionally?
no, none of my novels are self-published. I think I have a little bias. I admit to having a little bias against self-publishing because I know how much work it takes, uh, not only for the author alone to get through numerous drafts and bring it to a point where an editor, or a publisher or an agent might be interested in it, but then it goes through a whole other process. So if you're self-publishing, you're missing out on that whole other process, the dynamic between you and an editor, in a publishing house, and the input that they then have into the narrative that helps to bring it to a whole other level. So, no, all of my novels, the publisher of Freefall is Pinnell Publishing, and they published my first novel. They published Freefall, and they'll be publishing this other novel that will be coming out in October, Confessions of a Canadian Girl in Training, and uh, uh, and then Regal House Publishing published my other novel, Curva Pelagrosa.
Nice. And so, what type of feedback have you been getting from readers?
Well, I don't get a lot of direct feedback except from friends who look at me quizzically and who discover that there's a lot more going on in my mind than what they ever suspected. So that's kind of fun to be exposed in that way, and all writers, take that on if they start to publish their work. It's kind of like a dance of the seven veils. You can't avoid but expose yourself, even though
Right.
Tilly Bloom, the main character in Freefall, I'm not an installation artist, but there are aspects of me, that come up in her character. Just aspects of me come up in all of my characters. So
Right.
yeah, so you can't hide. Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask if you had a choice, would you rather have this book made into a movie or into a TV series?
Well, I'd be happy with both. I wouldn't. I wouldn't turn down either one of them. Would,
Right.
would you?
No, no, probably not. It's just interesting the different answers different people get. Some people prefer having a movie, and some people would prefer having a TV series. I guess it just depends on the person. It's
Well,
interesting,
yeah. I'm not. Why would I? Why wouldn't I want both?
right?
What? Really? Um, I, that I would refuse. Oh, I'm sorry, but I don't do TV. Or no, I'm sorry, but I couldn't
Right,
have this made into a movie. it's sort of,
right, right.
it's,
And you mentioned your next book coming out in October, so it's all written. It's just waiting with the publisher.
it's with the publisher going through an editing process right now. Yeah,
Got it.
yeah.
Okay.
And it features actually, it is a sequel to Freefall in the sense that the main character in Confessions of a Canadian Girl in Training is Tilly at a young age. So it follows her from about 4 years until about 18 years. It's a coming of age novel.
Okay. Um, and where can you get your book?
Well, guess what? Amazon. I'm
Got it.
sorry, but It's difficult to get if you unless you're really famous. It's difficult to get novels into bookstores. And what happens if you go to a bookstore and order a book, they can order it because it's part of that system, but they won't have it in their store. So you could go to your local
Right.
bookstore and say, "Gee, I'd like to get one of Liliana Mackenzie's novels," and they can look up the novels, and the bookstore could order it for them. But if so, they can do that if they can't stand Amazon and what it stands for. Uh, but Amazon, Barnes and Noble,
Do you
yeah,
do you offer the book for sale on your own website?
I don't. No, it's too complex.
Okay.
I mean, I have enough to take care of at the moment.
Got
To
it.
sell my books too.
Okay. Uh, okay. A couple other questions. Who are some of your favorite authors, and what's some of your favorite books?
Well, I have an eclectic taste in authors, and it'll come as no surprise that Gabriel Garcia Marquez is a favorite because magical realism, which he didn't start, but was a major genre that he wrote in, and he really inspired me, especially his book 100 Years of Solitude. But I love Anne Enright. She's an Irish author, and she's so witty and she's such an excellent writer that I'll read anything that she wrote. And the same thing, Per Pedersen, who's a Norwegian writer. He's just so lyrical, his prose, and he's so thoughtful. Again, I've read everything that he's written. W.B. Sebald, who initiated this whole other style of novel, it's kind of a hybrid novel, and I've read everything he's written. So, and these are all really, really different uh, writers. So I have, and I've recently gotten interested. I thought I'd never read mysteries, but I've discovered two wonderful mystery writers, Louise Penny, who's Canadian, a fellow Canadian. Hooray, hooray. And she just writes brilliant mystery novels. Again, I've read them all. And Peter May, who's Scottish, which Mackenzie has a little Scottish in her. So I've read all of his mystery novels, and I can really recommend them. They're fabulous. So
Nice.
my reading habits are vast.
Right. And where you live, do you have a favorite bookstore that you get to go to when you can?
Yeah, well, Book Passage in Corte Madera is a wonderful bookstore, and I've done the readings, the book launches for all of my books there too. So they've been splendid to work with, and there have been some stores in the city too in San Francisco that I've enjoyed working with as well.
Okay. And one last thing before we go, at least for the first half of this podcast, tell everybody why they should go get your book and read it.
Well, if they're interested in women's relationships, which isn't to say that I don't have any male characters, because I have some wonderful male characters in all of my books. But primarily, I spend a lot of time thinking about and writing about relationships between women, but also between women and men. But one of the underlying questions that motivate me as a writer is, what is reality? And I mean, that sounds like, what are you talking about?
Science
But
fiction.
it does, but that isn't what I'm after. I'm in all of my novels. It's a question that I'm exploring, and so so magical realism is a way for me to do that, because you can, the reality of the everyday reality is really important, but then there are the strange things that happen, and strange things do happen, and even stranger things happen in magical realism novels. So, but it's a way for me to explore that question. What is reality? What are we doing here? And the things that we see, uh, are they really real? So that comes up a lot in my work. Also, if you like humor, I do have a sense of humor that comes out in these narratives too. So there's lots of reasons to read them. They're thoughtful, and I have interesting twists. Yeah,
Great. Well, that sounds like a good enough reason for people to go check it out,
I
pick
think
it up.
so. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, Lily, I appreciate you talking to me about your books today. They sound great. I can't wait to hear about the next one. Maybe we could touch base sometime after it comes out.
That comes
All
out
right.
in October. So
October.
yeah,
Great.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for being on the podcast. And we'll have a second half in just a moment where we're going to talk about the demystifying the publication.
Right. The path to publication.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Discovered Wordsmiths. Come back next week and listen to another author discuss the road they've traveled, and maybe, sometime in the near future, it might be you.